Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, boys and girls. How are we doing today? Let's move my microphone a little bit closer. Test. Okay, how about now? I think I had my microphone in the wrong pickup position, which is why it wasn't. Anyway, today we are talking a little bit about the nature of free will as sponsored by our Year 1 Class 1 corporation. I should make it very clear that in my mind, our Year 1 students are so much more interesting and profound and actually much better at trying to be human than our Year 2 and Year 3 students, which is fantastically interesting. Given that they are mostly progeny, right? But here we are. So, what is free will? This is one of those very simultaneously very philosophical, but also very scientific answers that I will ever give. In part because free will as a concept philosophically is obviously something that people have argued over for decades, centuries, millennia. But free will from a biological perspective is very, very, I don't want to say easily defined, but to me it is something that is almost intuitively a result of our evolution, right? And I know I'm going to get a few angry comments from this by some of our listeners who perhaps aren't quite as well versed in the evidence and in the demonstration of what evolution is. As I am, and that's perfectly fine. I'm happy to engage, and this again goes out to everyone who might disagree with this. If you want to have a genuine discussion on this, I am open to answering any and all questions that you have. I am always open to your questions. I only ask that when you do ask your questions that you are open-minded about my answer. If you ask a question simply to make your own point, then it is not a discussion. It is simply you regurgitating your own beliefs that have been reconfirmed by the media that you consume. And I respect that. It's just when you do so, we cannot have a discussion. I cannot then go and help, and I cannot go and then give an answer that I think will be satisfactory to myself, because that no matter what kind of answer I would give, it would not be accepted as an answer. Exactly. Actually, one of our Year 1 Class 1 students said it just right. If you want an answer, understand that Muses is not going to answer politically. I am not going to give you a political answer. I am simply going to give you the answer to the best of my understanding of this topic. And if you want to claim that you understand this topic better than I do, you cannot quote the Bible, because that is not science. That is not... Okay, before we start with free will, actually this is kind of tangentially related to free will. if you want to discuss evolution with me and you quote the Bible, it makes it difficult for me to address these comments that you have, right? Um, let me quoting the Bible in a discussion on evolution makes it difficult for me to address your points, and this is related to free will. Because there is a fundamental requirement change between the Bible and sort of, let's say, on the origin of species, right? Like, imagine me mentioning Darwin, and that is that the Bible and almost all, almost all religions rely on faith, and I am not going to disparage that. I think there are people in this world that do require faith. And I am not saying that faith is inherently anti-science. I am not. Let me. Faith is not inherently anti-science, and that's a loaded comment for good reason. Yes, thank you. Faith is not inherently anti-science. When you talk about faith, though, oftentimes you lot that will mention faith will come at me with this idea of I believe, therefore it must be true. That is anti-science, and that is not faith, right? I believe, and therefore it must be true is not faith. That is boneheadedness, right? Like, let's be very clear about that, right? Just because you believe in something doesn't mean it is true, and there's a difference between that and faith. Okay, there's a huge difference between that and faith in the Lord, faith in the second coming of Jesus, faith in Armageddon. I don't know. Let's pick some. Let's pick. Actually, I'm not going to go into Zoroastrianism. Let's say, faith in reincarnation. Those things are not inherently anti-science. It is when you use that to justify something you don't understand, that act of justification is anti-science. Can we be very clear about that, right? I think it's important that if you have your faith, that you hold on to it. It's very, very important. Okay? If you have your faith, hold on to it. Do not use it as an excuse to reject something you do not yet understand. Are we clear? Good. Okay, what does this have to do with free will? Actually, very interestingly, I am of the opinion, and I realize that we started this trying to talk about the scientific underpinning of free will, but we might not even get to that today. I do apologize to our year one class 1 corporation. We can have another one next week when we talk about the scientific portion of it. But really, what does this have to do with free will? Well, to me, it is a very interesting question, what this has to do with free will, because inherently, what we find in a lot of organized religion is that it removes a lot of the organized religion tries to take a messy human society and bring order to it. Are we all okay with that definition? Organized religion tries to bring order to a more messy, normal human society. Not normal, more messy human society. Let's put it that way, right? And that inherently means confirmation. This inherently means confirmation, right? There is no other way around this. It is if this is inherent, right? Like this is inherent because free will. Okay, let's go back up one point real quick. We will talk about the true scientific underpinnings and evolution and all of that next time. But let me make this point: free will comes from the quantum mechanical randomness that underpins the ability of the brain to process and interpret information, right? Because it's all random, because there are these stochastic events. That's stochastic events and stochastic variables. Um, because there are these stochastic events, that is why identical twins, after they're born, even everything else being equal, can be completely different people. That's not to say that they have to be, only that they can be. If they're exposed to even slightly different stimuli, even if they're exposed to the exact same stimulus, their brains can evolve in completely different ways depending on these stochastic events that are happening at the biochemical level. At the biochemical level. Right? And that biochemistry is very much quantum physics mediated because all biology really is about shape. Well, let's not say all, but the vast majority of biology is about shape, about the interaction of individual atoms within a shape with something else, right? This is an inherently event. Okay, so I hope this makes you all feel better about yourself. You are all inherently quantum events. Anyway, let's get back to this. Because free will comes from randomness, and order is meant to suppress randomness. Organized religion can sometimes be suppressive of free will. Yes, exactly. I've been building up to this exact point, and it is. I'm not going to bring up examples, if only because there are too many of them. If you want examples, come to me afterwards. I will give you a non-exhaustive list of Wikipedia articles you can look at. But anyway, the point is this, right? When we try to bring order to a chaotic system, we are by definition reducing the degrees of freedom. That's the word I'm looking for. Where we are inherently trying to suppress degrees of freedom, and in that, it doesn't matter what kind of system, right? Like, let me just, no matter what system, if we try to bring order to it, we are inherently suppressing degrees of freedom within it. So let's give some examples. Let's say constraining a ball bearing to roll down a slope with a channel, right? I think this is a very simple example. You place a ball bearing at the top of a slope. You let it go. Depending on the ground, it'll sort of bump its way along. It'll change direction, whatever. But if you dig a nice channel for it, that means the ball bearing will always roll down that particular channel, etc., right? And so you are, by definition, you've brought order to the path of that ball bearing, but you have done so by constraining its degrees of freedom, right? Makes sense to me. Let's find another example. Let's say this is one example that I think our general population of viewers might not understand as well, but you guys will. Um, Designated a taxi spot in airports, or no, in the city, right? So again, what are we doing here? If we don't designate spots for taxis to park, they will be all over the place. There's a ton of freedom, but it's going to be chaotic. So when we bring order to this set of taxis that try to pick up people and send away and drop off people, when we bring order to that, we are inherently constraining the degrees of freedom. And I don't just mean the city of, obviously, places like in marinas. I'm talking about airports. We're talking about private clubs, all that kind of stuff, right? Like that's why yes, that's why there are designated taxi drop-off spots in front of hotels, etc., because they want to make it a nice, smooth flow as opposed to being, people just randomly pulling up and like, and like, an air is coming out of a taxi and getting run over by another taxi. So let's take it up a little bit further, right? Let's talk about a slightly bigger system. A city. We are constraining the movement of people by zoning, city zoning. Industrial areas, we're talking about the residential areas. Residential areas are put farther away from dirty factory zones, etc. And what does that do? Well, normally, if without order, if we could build a dirty factory, right beside some houses, and then people would get sick. And obviously, through our history, we have seen that that's probably not a good thing. So we move factories away from residential areas. Yes, we are bringing order to a chaotic system, and yes, we have inherently suppressed its degree of freedom, right? Let's go one bigger. Let's talk about nation states. Nation states, borders, and this is fairly topical. The whole concept of nation states is fantastically interesting, right? Like, let's not say that it came out of Louis XIV, even though there will be people who will claim that it is. But the idea of a state of the country, it brings order to chaotic movement of people. It brings order to chaotic movement of of people who speak the same language, etc. And well, I mean, even with the war in Ukraine, I think to me at least, the war in Ukraine actually makes this point for me. It is that sometimes when we try to bring order to a system, we are inherently constraining the degrees of freedom within that system. There are people, say for example, let's go 30 years back in time, 35 years back in time, to when the Iron Curtain was still a thing, right? Like the entire idea of the Soviet bloc cutting off half of Europe compared to the West. Or let's talk about, excuse me, excuse me. Oh, actually, the best. I should have used this much earlier. The Holy Roman Empire, right? So the Holy Roman Empire was a collection of minor German princes, of tiny little principalities, little statelets. And this was a result of the Carolingian Empire sort of breaking itself apart as the family fracture, right? Like prior to primogeniture, it used to be that when you died, you would split up your kingdom, your territory to all of your children, right? Each child would get something, and when that happens, well, like when that happens, you are essentially splitting up the kingdom, and it becomes smaller and smaller, and over 5-10 generations, these things just completely move apart from each other, right? They're no longer really the same people, and we saw that with the Carolingian Empire, and we saw like part of that became France, part of that became Italy, or modern day Italy. Part of that became what amounts to be the Holy Roman Empire, and as we and you can imagine in the Holy Roman Empire, it was very free because they were all tiny little princes that had the ability to do whatever they want within their own principality. It was tiny, it was still small, right? They didn't have much power, but they had a lot of freedom to do whatever they wanted. And as German unification came along, even prior to Napoleon um, tearing down the Holy Roman Empire, even prior to that, there was sort of slow reintegration of those principalities. As heirs would die, inherit, laws would get changed to be so that things didn't split apart. Exactly, primogeniture. And when this type of stuff happens, you know, as the reconsolidation of Germany happened, obviously you lose princes. Obviously, there's less freedom for these boys and girls to do what it is that what they could before that, right? So you do lose degrees of freedom when you are reconsolidating a nation state, right? So now let's talk about religion, right? Religion is one way to unite people before the advent of nationalism. When everybody believes in the same thing, then you can harness the power of that belief to do more than if people had all sorts of different ideas, right? And you would see this in ancient religions. You would see it in modern cults. You see it in modern politics. There's a reason why we call modern politics a religion, because it is in effect a grouping of people, that reduces the degrees of freedom for the people who follow that movement, right? Like say you are a say you are a Trump supporter. Say you are a MAGA Republican as opposed to a, let's say, quote unquote rhino, right? Like Republican in name only. Um, one second. MAGA versus rhino, right? Like say, and we are talking strictly within the Republican Party now. Say you are a Republican, but you are not a Make America Great Again Republican, and you have a little bit more freedom in choosing what you want, or what kind of policies you want to push for. Does that kind of make sense? Right? Like as a rhino, as a Republican in name only, you can choose, or you can do whatever kind of policies that you want. But when you follow something like the MAGA crowd, when you start self-identifying with the Make America Great Again crowd, you are in some ways constraining your own freedom, because there is a very specific set of beliefs that you have to espouse when you identify with that crowd. And oftentimes, like these things go hand in hand. As you get more MAGA-ish, you identify more MAGA-ish, and therefore it doesn't feel like you're losing any of your freedom or your free will, But from a outsider's perspective, from someone who is simply not allowed to vote, it is, or rather, let me make this clear: I choose not to, for very sort of tangential reasons, um, mostly tax. Um, you from an outsider's perspective, yes, it it is a loss in your degrees of freedom. You have less choice in what kind of policies you can support, right? There's no way around that when you make that leap. So when let's say versus independent versus versus dem versus progressive prog, right? Like I think it's very very clear, right, that when you it doesn't just go in the MAGA direction, it goes in the progressive direction as well. If you start off as an independent and you can choose to vote for Republicans, you can choose to vote for Democrats, you can choose to vote for libertarians. Remember Ron Paul? I miss. um and Elon Musk is one of the biggest disgraces to the libertarian. Let's be very clear about that. Um, when you're an independent, you can choose to, you really can choose to go in whatever direction you want. But as you, oh yeah, let me, as you sort of bring order to that chaos of independent voters, as you become a Republican, and so when you start identifying in these smaller segments, then you are losing your ability to, you're losing your degrees of freedom, right? Like as you start voting Republican, it becomes less easy for you to think about, to choose to vote Democratic, to choose to vote for progressive candidates, to choose to vote for the American Communist Party for all I care, right? Like and even within these groupings, of course, as you get more extreme, as you get as you bring more and more order to the system, you lose the ability to branch away from that system. I think that's perfectly clear. How are we feeling about this? This is let's say, what is free will? Let's say hard one out of question. There we go. Part one out of question. Cool. Questions? Why am I so pretentious? I'm so pretentious because I know more about the world than you do. I simply understand it better than you do. What are you gonna do about it? Anyway, so let me thank our Year One Class One Corporation for sponsoring this particular broadcast. I think I think this is an important topic that we should all be thinking about, and I hope that you lot will give it some thought. Vis-a-vis at least the ideas of religion, the ideas of free will. What is free will? When would you choose to exercise your free will? And why sometimes, if we want order, there is unfortunately a conformity aspect of order, right? That is, if you take anything away from this talk today, is that there is a conformity aspect of order because it by definition requires things to be similar. Cool? Cool. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. In conclusion, please stop Firefox, please stop Chrome. And I shall see all of you tomorrow when we will do our auctions to look at what we're doing next week. Cool. Cool. Oh yes, wink.